Now, Nigeria's oil sector is poised for a significant boost as the country meets its OPEC quota and increases oil production. This development is significant for the country's economy as oil exports have been the backbone of Nigeria's revenue generation. On the conversation this morning, we will explore potential implications of these increases and what it could mean for Nigeria's economic prospects. Our guest is no other person but Olabode Sunwunmi. He is an energy expert. You're welcome to Business Express. Good to have you again.
Good morning. Always a pleasure to be here.
Great. Good news from OPEC to Nigeria talking about our production quota, not just us meeting our production quota for the first time in a little long while. And not just that, according to data from OPEC's industrial report for April, Nigeria is said to be the biggest oil producer in Africa, followed by Algeria, though there has been this Nigeria, Algeria, and all of that. Can you take us through the numbers vis-a-vis in Libya?
Okay, I think first and fundamentally, the journey to becoming number one did not start today.
Okay.
And it needs to be put in perspective to the fact that from the 70s up until the 2000s, we had always been number one in Africa with a few ups and downs. But basically, our inability to retain that top position is largely because of internal issues. I mean, you know, and Africans have a proverb that if the enemy within cannot kill you, the one without can do you no harm. So when we talk about restiveness in the Niger Delta, when we talk about internal sabotage, when we talk about lacks within security efforts, those were some of the factors that hindered us from being able to maximally achieve what we wanted to achieve. And successive administrations had put in effort, and we were continually unable to meet our quota, our OPEC quota. So for us to achieve this figure is an achievement of some significant dimension. I mean, going by that fact. And achieving it is not necessarily saying that that is the peak of what we are able to do. We are still able to do more. I mean, for example, Dangote is still importing some of his fuel, not because we do not have more fuel to meet it, but because we are already maximizing out what we have. So it's in a temporary situation. So we still have room to dig in, to drill more crude, and then we'll meet our needs. It just so happens that when we do the right things, when we do the things we should do, as has been seen here, we will find ourselves at the top. So it wasn't like the intention was just to become the peak country in Africa and overtake Algeria or overtake Angola. That wasn't really the intention. The intention was just for us to achieve our maximum capacity. And in achieving that...
Talking about achieving maximum capacity, sorry, let me hold your thought at this point. You've mentioned that in spite of activities of the enemies within, we're able to hit this particular feat. What does it mean for Nigeria in terms of revenue accruals to the government?
Oh, basically it's more revenue. I mean, it's simple. I mean, if you are selling 1.4 million liters at 1.4 million barrels at $50 per barrel, and you jump to 2 million barrels at the same $50 per barrel, you don't need any special knowledge to know that that's increased revenue. Of course, that increased revenue, how it will be used is a different ballgame. That becomes administration, that becomes governance, that becomes National Assembly appropriation, that becomes the federal government direction to things. But for Nigeria, in terms of basic overview, that is increased revenue for us, which potentially means more infrastructure, which potentially means money to be used in other things. It means so many things. But whichever way you look at it, it's increased revenue, and that's good news.
Okay, a breakdown of oil revenue streams takes us through to kind of royalties, taxes, and even dividends. How are we faring in terms of remittances? It's one thing to have this increased production, which automatically means more money. But are we having these monies into the government coffers as it should? We hear from industrial reports from Nig'S, where you hear oil companies are not remitting to government what they should. in terms of royalties, in terms of taxes? How are we faring generally?
Okay, so
and what should we be doing moving forward to ensure that we don't just have these numbers, but it should reflect in the government purse?
Okay, so there are basically two main ways for administration of crude oil. There is the production sharing contract, and then of course there's the joint venture. In the joint venture, it means, like the name implies, it's a venture by 2 or 3 or more companies where they jointly agreed to go into a venture, which in this case is crude oil production, and they all put in some amount of money, which is based on the amount of money that they put in, they allocate their own shares, they drill the crude oil, and then it comes. Usually there's one company that will do the administration on behalf of everybody, which is typically an IOC. A lot of our OMLs are administered that way, but there's also the production sharing contract, where Nigeria in this case does not put in any money. The company which agrees to go into the contract will drill the oil, and then they will recover their initial investment, and after their initial investment there will be a sharing of whatever is available there. A lot of times where you have that situation is within the joint venture, and it's more or less an administrative issue, it's a contract issue, it's also a law enforcement issue, and it becomes difficult to speak specifically because there are no general cases. It's just like any other contract. A part of any contract can be violated, but at the same time, there may be factors behind it. So until we look at specific cases, are we talking about the contract being administered by Chevron, or is it the one being administered by ExxonMobil?
No. For this case, for the sake of this conversation, there's no need to go into such details. But let's talk about the cost of production. Nigeria is said to be the highest, with a total cost figure of $48.71 per barrel. Yeah. That is the cost of drilling 1 barrel of crude. While Saudi Arabia is $9, Norway is pegged around $21, and the USA $24. Why do we have such a disparity, considering the fluctuations in global price of sales? Like we had this morning, the WTI is going for like $83.76. If the cost of drilling this in Nigeria is up to $48, how can we make even? Why is the cost of production high?
I think it's incumbent upon us to demand the factors behind the cost of production from the regulator and from NNPC. I say this because if the information is not public, then one will be speculating or using insider information. It is important to also note that there is a factor of production which we have, which is a major cost that all these other countries don't have, and that's security. Most people need gunboats, specialized gunboats, which they need to buy, which they need to maintain. They need police forces there, they need army, they need, there are certain things, costs that are associated with security, which are not necessarily in those countries. So it still goes back to us as a nation that when we think that we are taking advantage of these oil companies, we are actually putting the cost back on us. So it's incumbent upon us really to ensure that there's stability and security is no longer a major concern when it comes to people doing their business. This is not something that the federal government alone can do, or the state government. It must become a culture as a people. The rural areas, the communities, the people in the oil producing region need to internalize it, that there is nothing to be gained in the long term if there is no stability, and if insecurity is not taken away. That is really a major factor in cost of production.
Okay, now you've mentioned security as that additional cost that might differ from others. The Norway we've talked about, and the United States we've talked about, amongst others. There's also the cost of labor and equipment. How do all of this possibly affect the impact on profit margins and revenue? More so, there is also the call for local content in some of this production, and not just relying on equipment from outside the country, following Forex and all of that. What do you think is the way to go?
Well, I'm not sure anybody can be able to implement local content when it comes to equipment, because we don't have the equipment. We're not producing the equipment. So it's like basically saying that you need local content for aeroplanes. Who is going to supply it? So we also need to be realistic in terms of demands when it comes to things like local content. One of the things could be that maybe component parts of these things, we could have people that will set it up. I mean, for example, if we wanted to start manufacturing laptops or wanted to start manufacturing LCD screens, it's not necessarily for you to have the whole screen, I mean the whole TV or the whole laptop. You could start with manufacturing microchips.
It's done everywhere in the world.
Yes, but it's not everywhere there's a major producer of this thing. So there are a few, I mean, the amount of money that Taiwan makes from microchips is 4 times the amount of money that we make from crude oil. So it is all about structure, it's all about development. It is also about the culture of us as a people. We need to have a sense of productivity. The culture of our grandparents when they were working, when there was no oil, when there was the struggle to go to the farm. You see, there's a work ethic, the ethic that you want to be productive. Whether you are literate or illiterate, there are those slogans, those poems that they used to say that encourage people to read, that encourage people to work. That work ethic is one of the fundamentals that is missing. So it doesn't matter whether we have oil or not. If the people are not productive, the nation will not be productive. Oil is not what makes productivity.
Just to wrap up your thoughts, talking about productivity, what in your opinion will be the potential solutions and strategies for maximizing oil revenues while minimizing cost as well as the environmental impact?
Okay, so when we talk about oil, we need not to forget that there's something called the Dutch cost, which is basically oil nations having issues and all that. The only nation in the world that is a major oil producer that is not having that is Norway. And it's the same thing. It's about the work culture. Yes, they produce more oil in the US than we do, although they import as well. The difference with all these nations is about the culture. There is an assumption, but a false assumption, that you can be productive, you can be successful without work. So we see young people saying that, look at that man, he didn't do any work, he becomes successful. I want no work. Those things are phantoms. The reality of life, the way God has created life, the way systems of life, the way the fundamentals of life are, is that there must be productivity before success.
Sure.
Even in career, you cannot succeed in your career if you are not hardworking. You can get people to push you up, you can follow the politics, but you will not be productive. So we as a people, the young people, everybody growing up must imbibe the ethos of productivity. In other words, if I am on this job, what am I doing on this little job that nobody else can do? What value am I adding? If we do not have a value addition perspective, oil cannot solve it for us.
Thank you very much, Olabode Sunwunmi, for that parting words. Productivity before success. Input determines the output. Thank you for sharing your thoughts at this point in time.
It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.